everybody. Today's recording is a bit of an introduction to emotion coaching, which I know I've talked about before in one of my other videos, but I really want to break it down into manageable chunks because there's quite a lot to the technique, but if we look at it broken up, it's probably easier to learn. So I'm planning on doing 5 separate videos for this. Today's is a bit of an introduction of how emotion coaching encourages positive brain development for your children, and just looking at some of the barriers to why we might not use emotion coaching naturally, and how it fits into the model of rewards and sanctions as well, and how it compares to that kind of approach. So it's a bit of an information-y kind of video that I'm going to do today. My next video that I will do will look at the different styles and the different approaches that we use with young people. So we're going to look at basically with young people and their emotions. So we're going to have a look at the dismissive approach, the disapproving approach, the laissez-faire approach, and emotion coaching, and look at a model of how they all fit together. The third video, we will look at the first part of emotion coaching, which is the use of empathy, and we'll go into some detail of how we can use empathy with our children when they are expressing challenging behaviour that is coming from their emotions. The next video, video number 4, will look at the next step, which is reinforcing rules and boundaries, teaching our children why it's not okay to hurt themselves or other people or property. And the final video will be looking at techniques of how we can do things differently, basically the teaching part. So I love emotion coaching because it incorporates so much teaching and learning for your children. And I think I've mentioned in one of my videos before that we just assume that children understand how to behave and how to manage their emotions, but it definitely has to be explicitly taught. And the brilliant thing about emotion coaching is that we can do it in the moment, we can do it in the field. So if your child is displaying a challenging behaviour, you can use emotion coaching there and then to regulate them and to reinforce boundaries, and to then think, right, how are we going to do things differently? So I'm just going to use today's session, like I've said, to look at a little bit of the science behind it and how it affects our brain. So there is a nerve in our brain called the vagus nerve, not Las Vegas, different spelling, of the vagus nerve, and it originates in our brainstem. And this nerve is what initiates the stress response, the fight, flight, freeze response to stress. So when we're attempting to calm our children down, or when we're attempting to reinforce boundaries or rules, sometimes we can go in with quite a challenging approach ourselves, which again we'll look at in another video. When we do this, we're actually exacerbating the stress that our children are already feeling, and it is impacting them on in a very physical way, and it impacts on their brain development as well. Let's get my dog. So what I do want to say though, before I go into too much detail, a little bit of a disclaimer. We all know that whether you're a parent or a carer or a teacher or anybody working with young people, it's a very, very wonderful and rewarding but very challenging role, and it all comes with bucket loads of guilt. So please, 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 when you watch this and listen to the information, try not to be thinking, oh, you know, I do that all the time, I'm affecting my child's brain development, it's all my fault, I'm doing it all wrong. Please don't think that. It's great that we can reflect on our approach and reflect on how we manage things. And in my experience, my own personal experience and my experience of working with families, the biggest barrier to us adopting an emotion coaching style rather than a disapproving or a dismissive style is because of the era that we were brought up in. So, you know, if like me, you were brought up in the 80s, or, you know, maybe some of you brought up in the 70s or the 90s, I think our parents tend to use very strict discipline, and you know, it was the kind of time where children were seen and not heard, and you do as you're told just because. And I think it's quite hard for us to then look at our children now, see them struggling, and think, well, you know, just do it as you're told, because that's what I had to do. Unfortunately, it doesn't actually teach our children anything, and by not addressing the emotions, we're kind of setting them up for emotional and mental health issues when they're older. So we'll look into the different approaches in a little bit more detail in the other video. But I do think it is a massive barrier to actually learning a new approach because of the way we were brought up as children. So please try to just put that to one side and just think, well, maybe there are other ways. Maybe there are other ways of teaching our children how to manage their emotions. And when our children learn how to manage their emotions, they behave differently. And that's what we want for them. We want them to be like fully functioning, happy adults, don't we, that know how to regulate their emotions and their behaviour. So that to me is a barrier. So try and take down that barrier if you want to introduce change into your family and into how you manage things. And please don't feel guilty. I remember when I first learned all of this, I would think back to some of the teaching styles that I might have used in my earlier years and think, oh, you know, I probably wasn't helping, and you know, I probably actually made the situation worse in some instances. But that's okay, because that's what learning is all about. It's about accepting that we can do things differently. Please don't feel guilty if you listen to this or you look at some of the approaches and think, oh my gosh, I've been, you know, making things worse. So basically, the vagus nerve that initiates the fight, flight, freeze response in your children will encourage us to pick up on, very subconsciously and very animalistic actually, it's our instinct, because when we are activating our fight, flight, freeze, when we are in that stress response, we aren't thinking logically, we're not thinking rationally, we are operating in our most animalistic state. So in our animal, reptilian state that we are in, we will look for facial cues, the look on the person's face that we are with. We will listen to the voice, and we will recognise the volume of the voice. They will all be quite significant in what we pick up on during our interactions when we are in that state. And the stress hormone, the cortisol, that then floods through our system will affect all of our organs as well. So it will affect our organ development as well. So when we are faced with a young person or any person that is in their fight, flight, freeze state, we can either add to that or we can soothe, because the vagus nerve also soothes. So if it picks up on facial response that is very calm and very open to supporting the person, or if there is a voice that is very calm and soothing, or if sometimes there is no talk but actually just somebody's there in a soothing response, depending what the emotion is, and they're talking in a very level way with quite a low volume, the vagus nerve will then pick up on that and kickstart a self-soothing approach, a self-soothing kind of cycle for the person who is feeling it, and they will learn that. So it becomes a learned physical response, that when I get sad, somebody soothes me and I feel better. Or when I get angry, somebody soothes me and I can calm down and I can rationalise. If when they are sad or angry or worried, they are faced with, or anxious and scared, they're faced with and not so much of a soothing approach, and facial features that aren't as calm, they will learn that response, and they will learn that when I get angry, there is other people get angry, and that adds to my own anger, and then they will be stuck in that loop where things don't really get resolved. So the brilliant thing is with the vagus nerve, that then teaches our brain vagal tone. It basically teaches our brain how to react to stress. We can either add to the stress, or we can soothe the stress. I mean, I think it's a no-brainer, but we often don't know this, do we? We often don't realise that actually there are ways of soothing our children physically and neurologically, so it will affect their brain. Our approach will affect their brain in a really positive way. So the brilliant thing about emotion coaching is that it builds on all of those things. So by encouraging positive brain development, we have clear thinking, our children have improved attention, they have better emotional balance, they're more resilient, it boosts their immune system. So to me, to be able to affect that in a positive way is just a great thing to know, isn't it? It's a great thing to know that we can do that. Again, please, please, please don't feel bad if you feel like you haven't been doing that, because we are all on a bit of a learning curve, I think, when it comes to this kind of approach. I'm going to say a couple more things before I finish about how emotion coaching fits in more traditional behaviour management, if you want to look at it that way. So sometimes we put in rewards and sanctions, because again, that's probably what we experience. We probably experience more sanctions than rewards. And sometimes they have their place, but I think it's important to be aware that when we try to manage a child's behaviour without looking at what led to that behaviour, without looking at the emotions behind it, we are basically doing to children. So all of the rewards and the sanctions are external. They're not coming from the child. They're not learning anything. They're not being taught anything. They are literally, their emotional well-being is dependent on another person either giving them a reward or a sanction. So they become reliant on other people to regulate their behaviour, again, without actually looking at the emotions that led to that behaviour. So it's like the tip of the iceberg. And you might find as a parent or a teacher or a carer that when you do that, nothing ever actually changes. You're constantly sanctioning or you're constantly rewarding. The naughty step, or whatever you want to call it, timeout corner, again exacerbates stress in a child. It's far more beneficial to have time in rather than time out. So if your child needs space to calm down, fantastic. Make sure they know where their space is. It could be a den in their bedroom, or it could be just in their bed or somewhere, but they're not being sent there as a punishment. They're being sent there for a legitimate reason so that they can calm down. Time out often triggers rejection in children. It triggers a feeling of not really being supported in their emotions, that they're being pushed away. It doesn't teach them anything. So if you have a timeout strategy or a naughty step, again, don't feel too guilty, because I know it was a very, very much legitimate response that was taught to us over the last 20 years. It was very mainstream, wasn't it, to use a naughty step or use a timeout corner or whatever. But actually it doesn't really teach our children how to do things differently. And if you do have that in your family, you might notice that actually you've had it for years and you still need to use it, and it's still a battle to get your child to comply with going to the corner, because they don't really want to be away from you. They don't want to be pushed away when they're experiencing strong emotions. They need to kind of connect with you more than ever, at this point. So it's more about time in, more about connecting with your child rather than sending them away. Sometimes we need to send them away, like I've said, if they need to calm down, and sometimes we need to calm down, and it's a very legitimate thing to do. If you think, I just need to be calm, I cannot speak to this child until I'm calm, then that's okay. But as a regular strategy, I would recommend time in rather than time out. Emotion coaching, however, in contrast to rewards and sanctions, teaches a child how to regulate themselves. So the more you do emotion coaching, the less you have to do it, because the child will learn that actually, like I've said before, the vagal tone will respond to your approach, so their brain will encourage them to be calm, their brain development will encourage that calm. They will also be learning what the boundaries are while they're calm, and they will also be learning ways to regulate themselves. So just to repeat, the more you do emotion coaching, the less you have to do it. Whereas in my experience, the more you do sanctions, the more you have to do it. And we want our children happy and calm, don't we? We want them behaving in a way that is positive. So again, I'd say it's a bit of a no-brainer. If we know something can work and we know that our children can become independent in their emotional regulation, that's kind of what we're aiming for. So thank you for listening. The next one I'm going to upload, the next video I'm going to upload, will look at different styles and just bit of compare and contrast. And again, come with your guilt-free approach of not beating yourself up basically for not doing this before. So yeah, hope you've enjoyed that, and I hope it's been useful to you, and I'll catch you later.